The fluorescent lights of St. Jude's Rural Infirmary have a unique way of humming a funeral dirge. It's a low, constant drone that seeps into your bones, a soundtrack for the quiet desperation that often finds its way to our doors. For 10 years, I've been the Chief of Diagnostic Medicine here, which is a fancy title for the guy they call when a patient is a puzzle no one else wants to solve. My name is Dr. Elias Vance, and I came here seeking silence. I found it, but it was a hollow, echoing kind of peace. The city burns you out with its noise. The country grinds you down with its quiet. My office is more of a glorified closet, a small space overlooking a sea of pine trees that stand like stoic, green sentinels against a perpetually grey sky. That night, the wind was wrestling with them, and a hard, cold rain was lashing against the window pane. It was the kind of storm that cuts us off from the rest of the world, turning this already isolated hospital into an island. Proximity, forced and absolute. The call came at 2 a.m. It was Lena, Dr. Petrova, a resident, barely a year out of med school, sharp as a scalpel and just as rigid. She follows protocols like their scripture. "Dr. Vance," she said, her voice tight with a nervous energy I knew all too well. "We have an admission. Emergency services found her on the old logging road. No ID, unconscious, hypothermic. But there's something else. Something strange." My instincts, rusty as they were, kicked in. "On my way." I pulled on my lab coat over my scrubs, the fabric worn and familiar. The short walk from my on-call room to the ER was a journey I'd made 1,000 times, but the storm's fury made the hospital feel different. It felt like a ship tossed on a violent sea. She was in trauma bay too. They had already stripped her of her wet, torn clothes and had her hooked up to monitors. I saw her chart first. Female, early 20s, no identifying marks beyond a small, star-shaped birthmark on her wrist. Vitals were all over the place. Low blood pressure, erratic heart rate, but her core temperature was the most immediate threat. Then I saw her, and the world seemed to slow down. Her face was pale, framed by long, dark hair that was still damp and clung to the pillow. Even unconscious, with a breathing tube down her throat, there was a profound sense of stillness about her, a stark contrast to the chaos of her vitals on the screen beside her. I'd seen thousands of patients, but she was different. It wasn't a medical observation. It was something deeper, something I couldn't articulate. A flicker of a forgotten feeling. "We've started active rewarming with heated IV fluids and a warming blanket," Lena reported, standing at the foot of the bed, her arms crossed. The quintessential textbook approach. Her blood work is a mess. Severe dehydration, electrolyte imbalance, but her white blood cell count is normal. No signs of infection. I walked closer, my eyes scanning the monitors, then her. I gently lifted her hand. It was cold, almost like marble. The star-shaped birthmark felt like a tiny constellation in a vast, empty sky. "No signs of trauma." "None," Lena confirmed. "No head injuries, no broken bones. It's as if she just lay down in the middle of the road and went to sleep." But people don't just do that. Not in a storm like this. I looked at her face again. It was peaceful. Too peaceful. This wasn't just hypothermia. This was a system shutting down for a reason we couldn't see. My mind, the diagnostic engine I had spent a lifetime building, began to turn. The humming of the lights seemed to fade as a dozen questions flooded my thoughts. Who was she? Where did she come from? And what was the secret her body was hiding? Let's get a full toxicology screen and a CT scan of her head and chest, and run a comprehensive metabolic panel. I want to know everything her blood can tell us, I ordered, my voice more forceful than I intended. Lena nodded, but I saw a flicker of doubt in her sharp grey eyes. "Doctor, the protocol for hypothermia is to stabilize before running extensive." "This isn't just hypothermia, Dr. Petrova." I cut her off, my gaze still fixed on the patient. "This is something else. And the protocol for something else is to find out what the hell it is before it kills her. In that moment, she became more than a case file. She was a mystery delivered to my doorstep on the wings of a storm. They called her Jane Doe on the chart, a placeholder for a life we knew nothing about. But to me, she was the first puzzle in years that felt like it mattered. My colleagues would see a routine admission. What they didn't see was that this solitary doctor, the man who had walled off his heart from the world, had just been handed a reason to feel again. And that, in a place like St. Jude's, was the most shocking development of all. The next 48 hours were a tense, frustrating dance with death. Jane's condition refused to stabilize. We'd get her temperature up and her heart rate would plummet. We'd correct her electrolytes and her blood pressure would crash. It was like trying to patch a dozen holes in a sinking ship all at once. The storm raged on outside, mirroring the tempest inside our ICU. We were well and truly alone. The test results only deepened the mystery. The CT scans were clear. The toxicology screen was negative for every drug, poison, and substance we could test for. Her blood work was a paradox. It showed signs of extreme physical stress, like someone who had run a marathon, yet her muscle enzymes were normal. There was no evidence of exertion. It made no sense. She was a ghost in the machine, her body a collection of symptoms without a cause. I practically lived in her room, fueled by stale coffee and a growing obsession. I reviewed every piece of data, every waveform on the monitor, searching for a pattern, a clue. I barely spoke to anyone, communicating mostly through terse orders written on her chart. Lena followed them to the letter, her professionalism a silent rebuke to my increasingly unconventional focus. I knew what she was thinking, that I was getting too attached, that I was losing my objectivity. She wasn't wrong. "You haven't slept in 2 days, Elias," she said on the third morning, finding me by Jane's bedside, staring at the ventilator that breathed for her. The rain had finally softened to a persistent drizzle. "You're no good to her if you collapse." "I'm fine," I grunted, not taking my eyes off the rhythmic rise and fall of Jane's chest. "Did you run the autoimmune panel again?" "Yes, for the third time. It's negative," she replied, her voice softening slightly. "Her system isn't attacking itself. It's just giving up. Maybe there's nothing to find. Maybe it's a rare genetic disorder, something we aren't equipped to diagnose, let alone treat." Her words were meant to be pragmatic, to manage my expectations, but they felt like a surrender, and I wasn't ready to surrender. I looked at Jane's face, the serene mask that hid the war being waged within her. In her stillness, I saw a reflection of my own life, a quiet, orderly existence on the surface, with a deep, unresolved emptiness underneath. Saving her felt inextricably linked to saving myself. It was an irrational, dangerous thought for a physician to have. That afternoon, I found a small, worn book of poetry tucked into the pocket of the jacket she was found in. It had been catalogued in evidence. I signed it out, needing a connection to who she was. The pages were filled with handwritten notes in the margins, delicate script that spoke of a thoughtful mind. One passage was underlined, a line from Keats. "A thing of beauty is a joy forever. Its loveliness increases. It will never pass into nothingness." Holding that book, I felt a powerful sense of her as a person. She wasn't just a collection of symptoms. She was someone who loved poetry, who felt deeply enough to underline those words. The idea of her passing into nothingness became unbearable. The thought made my chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with exhaustion. This was no longer just a medical puzzle. It was personal. That night, I had an idea. It was a long shot, a desperate leap based more on intuition than evidence. There was an old, almost forgotten field of medicine that dealt with environmental toxins, specifically rare botanical neurotoxins found in isolated ecosystems like our surrounding forests. There were stories, almost myths, in old medical journals about plants that could induce a state of suspended animation, a near-complete shutdown of the body's systems to conserve energy. The symptoms were a perfect, terrifying match. I brought my theory to Lena. We were in the deserted hospital cafeteria, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant. "Botanical neurotoxin?" she asked, her skepticism palpable. "Elias, that's theoretical at best. There are no standardized tests for that. We wouldn't even know what to look for." "I know," I said, leaning forward, my voice low and urgent. "But look at the facts. She was found on a logging road, deep in the forest. She has no signs of trauma, no infection, no known poisons in her system. Her body is shutting itself down cleanly, efficiently, almost deliberately. It's not a failure of the system, it's a programmed response." "A response to what? A flower?" she countered, her brow furrowed. "We can't treat a patient based on a medical ghost story." This was the core of our conflict. She was a scientist who trusted data and protocols. I was a diagnostician who had learned the hard way that the most important clues are often the ones you can't measure. They exist in the patient's story, in the spaces between the data points. "The book of poetry," I said suddenly. "She underlines things. She's observant. What if she picked something, touched something, a rare flowering plant she'd never seen before?" "That's a massive leap of logic," Lena argued, though I saw a flicker of consideration in her eyes. The idea, as wild as it was, fit the bizarre set of facts. "It's a leap I'm willing to take," I said, my decision solidifying. "There's an antidote. It's a compound derived from a specific type of tree bark. It's highly experimental, and it's dangerous. It could shock her system and cause cardiac arrest." Lena stood up, her face pale. "You can't be serious. You want to administer an unapproved, potentially lethal substance based on a hunch about a plant from a fairy tale? That's not medicine, Elias. That's reckless. I can't support this. I'll have to report it to the board." The threat hung in the air between us. My career, my license, everything I had worked for was on the line. But when I thought of Jane, lying silent in that ICU bed, her life slowly fading into nothingness, the choice was clear. The fear of losing my job was nothing compared to the fear of losing her. "Then report it," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "But I'm doing it. The storm has cut off the phones intermittently. By the time you get a signal and reach the board, it will be too late, one way or another." I walked away, leaving her standing alone in the empty cafeteria. My heart was pounding. Every rational part of my brain was screaming that I was making a catastrophic mistake. But a deeper instinct, a part of me that had been asleep for a decade, was wide awake. It told me that this was the only path. I was stepping off a cliff, guided only by a line in a poem and a feeling I couldn't explain. The solitude I had once craved now felt like a crushing weight. I was truly on my own, and a young woman's life was in my hands. The thought of her, vulnerable and trusting, even in her unconscious state, made my chest ache. I drafted and erased 3 text messages to my estranged sister, the only family I had left. I couldn't bring myself to send them. What would I even say? That I was about to risk everything for a stranger. The ICU was silent save for the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator and the soft, steady beep of the heart monitor. It was a fragile, mechanical pulse. Jane's pulse, for now. I held the syringe in my hand, the clear liquid inside looking deceptively harmless. It was the experimental compound, the bark extract, the antidote to a poison that might not even exist. My hand was steady, but my mind was a raging storm. Lena's words echoed in my head. Reckless, a medical ghost story. She was right, of course. From a purely logical, evidence-based standpoint, this was indefensible. If I was wrong, the best-case scenario was that nothing would happen. The worst-case scenario was that I would kill her. The compound could trigger a massive allergic reaction, or, more likely, a fatal arrhythmia. Her heart, already struggling, would simply stop. My career would be over. I would face malpractice suits, investigations, and the end of my life as a physician. I would be a man who killed his patient with a guess. I looked at her face. The overhead light softened the lines of her features, making her look younger, more vulnerable than ever. I thought about the poetry book, the underlined passage. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. What joy was there in this sterile, silent room? What beauty in a life sustained by machines? I had a choice. I could follow the rules, do nothing, and watch her fade away. Her decline was slow, a gentle slide into the abyss. No one would blame me. I would have done everything by the book, or I could take this insane risk, this leap of faith, and give her the only chance I believed she had. Lena appeared at the doorway, her face etched with conflict. She didn't say a word. She just stood there, a silent witness. Her presence was both an accusation and, strangely, a comfort. It meant I wasn't entirely alone in this. She wouldn't help, but she wouldn't leave. She would watch. My thumb hovered over the plunger. This was it, the point of no return. My entire life had been about calculated risks, about weighing probabilities and choosing the path of least harm. But this wasn't a calculation. This was an act of faith. Faith in my own instincts. Faith in a connection I felt to a woman I had never spoken to. I thought about my own life, the quiet, empty years at St. Jude's. I had been in a state of suspended animation myself, just a more socially acceptable version. Maybe saving her wasn't just about her. Maybe it was about me too, about proving that a part of me was still alive. "Elias, don't," Lena whispered from the doorway, her voice barely audible. I met her gaze. My own must have held a certainty that surprised us both. "I have to." I turned back to Jane. I took her hand, the one with the star-shaped birthmark. Her skin was still cool. "My name is Elias," I said softly, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. "I don't know who you are, or if you can hear me, but I'm not going to let you go." With a steady breath, I pushed the plunger. The clear liquid slid into her IV line, entering her bloodstream. And then, all hell broke loose. The heart monitor, which had been beeping a slow, steady rhythm, erupted into a shrill, continuous alarm. The green line on the screen devolved into a chaotic, jagged scribble. Ventricular fibrillation. Her heart was no longer beating. It was quivering uselessly. She was in cardiac arrest. My worst fear. It was happening. "Crash cart! Now!" My voice boomed through the ICU, a crack of thunder in the suffocating silence. The carefully constructed world of my gamble had just exploded. Lena, her face a mask of horror, was already moving, her training overriding her shock. She wheeled the cart over, its metal frame rattling, a sound I would never forget. "I'm charging to 200, she yelled, her voice professional and sharp, cutting through my own rising panic. I ripped the front of Jane's gown open, exposing her chest. I grabbed the defibrillator paddles, the cold metal a stark reality in my hands. "Clear!" I shouted. I pressed the paddles to her chest. Her body arched off the bed with the force of the electric shock, a violent, tragic ballet. My eyes were glued to the monitor. The jagged line continued its chaotic dance. No change. My heart hammered against my ribs. I did this. I killed her. The thought was a shard of ice in my gut. "Charging to 300. Lena's voice was strained. "Clear." Again the shock. Again her body convulsed. Again nothing. The continuous, piercing alarm of the monitor was the sound of my failure. It was the sound of the end of her life, and the end of mine. "Again! Max charge, 360, I yelled, desperation clawing at my throat. This was the last chance. The protocol was clear. After 3 shocks, the chances of converting the rhythm dropped dramatically. Lena charged the paddles. The high-pitched whine of the machine filled the air. "Clear!" I pressed the paddles down hard. One last brutal jolt. For a terrifying second, the line on the monitor flatlined. A perfectly straight green line. The alarm shifted to a single soul-destroying tone. A systole. No electrical activity. Silence. My hands dropped from the paddles. I stared at the flatline, the undeniable electronic proof of death. A profound, crushing emptiness washed over me. I had been so sure, so arrogant. I had played God, and I had lost. Lena was looking at me, her grey eyes wide with a mixture of fear and pity. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. There was nothing to say. I had crossed a line, and a young woman was dead because of it. And then, a miracle. A tiny green spike appeared on the monitor. Then another, and another. A slow, steady rhythm began to emerge from the flat line. Sinus bradycardia. It was slow, dangerously slow, but it was a coordinated beat. Her heart had restarted. I couldn't breathe. Lena gasped. We both stared at the screen, mesmerized, as the rhythm picked up, growing stronger and more regular. Beep, beep, beep. The most beautiful sound in the world. I stumbled back, my legs weak, and leaned against the wall, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor. I buried my face in my hands, my body trembling with a mixture of relief and residual terror. I had stared into the abyss, and for a moment, I had fallen in. Over the next few hours, Jane's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. Her vitals stabilized, not just temporarily, but for good. Her blood pressure returned to normal. Her heart rate settled into a healthy rhythm. We were able to wean her off the ventilator, and she began breathing on her own. It was as if a switch had been flipped. The invisible enemy had been defeated. My wild, reckless guess had been right. Lena and I didn't speak about what happened. There was an unspoken understanding between us. She had witnessed both my greatest failure and my greatest success in the span of 5 minutes. She had seen me break every rule and somehow save a life that was already lost. The rigid lines of her black and white world had been blurred into shades of grey. She looked at me differently now, not with suspicion, but with a new, grudging respect. And maybe a little fear. I stayed by Jane's bedside, watching her sleep, this time a natural, healing sleep. I was no longer just her doctor. I was tethered to her by the shared trauma of those terrible minutes, by the secret knowledge of how close she had come to the end. The professional boundary I had always maintained had been obliterated. I had risked everything for her, and in doing so, I had tied my fate to hers. The idea of Laia being vulnerable, of her life being in my hands, had made my chest tighten before. Now, the reality of what I had done, the sheer weight of it, was both terrifying and exhilarating. I felt more alive than I had in a decade. Late that night, as I was checking her vitals one last time, her eyelids fluttered. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, her eyes opened. They were large and brown, just as I had imagined, but they were clouded with confusion. They blinked a few times, adjusting to the dim light of the room. Her gaze moved around, taking in the IV stand, the monitors, and then finally me. Her lips parted, and she spoke, her voice a dry, raspy whisper. Where am I?" "You're in a hospital," I said, my voice softer than I intended. I pulled a chair closer to her bed. "You're at St. Jude's. You've been very sick. Do you remember what happened?" She stared at me, her brow furrowed in concentration. She shook her head slowly, a barely perceptible movement. "No, I remember walking. Trees. There was a flower. A beautiful white flower. I touched it." Her eyes widened slightly with a distant, hazy memory. That's all. It was confirmation. The final piece of the puzzle locking into place. The botanical neurotoxin was real. My ghost story was true. A wave of vindication washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by a simple, profound relief that she was awake, that she was talking. "My name is Elias Vance," I said. "I'm your doctor. We've been taking care of you." "Jane," she whispered. "My name is Jane." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. But her eyes held a deep uncertainty. I realized with a start that she was telling me the only name she knew, the name from her chart. She had amnesia. The toxin, or the ordeal, had wiped her memory clean. The mystery, I realized, was far from over. In some ways, it was just beginning. Over the next week, Jane's physical recovery was swift, but her memory remained a blank canvas. She had no idea who she was, where she was from, or if anyone was looking for her. We ran her fingerprints through every database we could access. Nothing. It was as if she didn't exist before she appeared on that logging road. During that time, the hospital, my former sanctuary of solitude, became a different place. Lena and I worked together, no longer as adversaries, but as partners. The shared intensity of what we had been through had forged a new respect between us. She had seen me at my most reckless and, somehow, my most brilliant. She started asking my opinion on her other cases, seeing me not as a burnt-out cynic, but as a mentor. But my focus was Jane. We talked for hours every day. I told her about the world, about books and music. She had a quick mind and a gentle, curious nature. She listened with an unnerving intensity, as if she were hearing everything for the first time, which in a way she was. I found myself telling her things I hadn't told anyone, about why I left the city, about the demanding career that had cost me my marriage, about the quiet ache of loneliness that had become my constant companion. In sharing my past, I was helping her build a new one. I was no longer just her doctor. I was her anchor, her first friend in a world she couldn't remember. The professional lines were not just blurred. They had vanished completely. I would bring her books from the hospital library, and we would read poetry aloud. When we got to the Keats poem from her book, she smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. "I like that," she said. "It feels familiar." One evening, I found her standing by the window of her room, looking out at the endless expanse of pine trees as the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. "Do you think I'll ever remember?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Who I was?" I stood beside her. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But does it matter?" She turned to look at me, her expressive brown eyes searching my face. "What do you mean?" "The person you were might be gone," I said. "But the person you are now, she's right here. She's strong. She's kind. She likes poetry. That person is real." A tear traced a path down her cheek, and I instinctively reached out and wiped it away with my thumb. My fingers lingered on her skin for a moment longer than they should have. A current passed between us, a silent, powerful acknowledgement of the bond we shared. It was a bond forged in crisis, in shared vulnerability, and in the quiet hours of her recovery. It was something more than friendship, and it was far more than a doctor-patient relationship. "Thank you, Elias," she whispered, her gaze holding mine, "for not giving up on me." "Never," I replied, my voice thick. In that moment, I realized the shocking truth. It wasn't my decision to use the experimental antidote that had shocked everyone. Lena was the only one who truly knew the extent of that gamble. The real shock was what came after. The brilliant, solitary, cynical Dr. Vance, the man who kept the world at arm's length, had let someone in. I hadn't just saved her life. She had, in every meaningful way, saved mine. She had woken me from my own long slumber. The love for a patient, the forbidden, sacred rule of medicine, had become the one thing that could heal a wound I never even admitted I had. I had spent a decade seeking solitude, only to find that the one thing I truly needed was a connection. And I had found it in the most unexpected way, with a woman who had no past, who was now, inextricably, my future. The story was just beginning. What did you think of Elias's impossible choice? Do you believe he was reckless or brave? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love reading your perspective on the story. If you enjoyed this medical drama, please give this video a like and be sure to subscribe to the channel for a new story every week. Your support allows us to keep creating the content you love. Thank you for listening.